in business, we've taken that as in, okay, we got to give people stuff because they somehow then feel indebted to us. And then we have more chance of them wanting to work with us. And whilst that's in essence true, a lot of businesses get this wrong. A lot of businesses are investing in what they think will activate reciprocity, but actually doesn't. And so they waste a lot of money, maybe on something that's still nice, but it doesn't activate reciprocity.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Patrick van der Burgt, a global authority on ethical persuasion and a business partner of Dr. Robert Cialdini.
Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com.
Success in both business and life depends on one thing: convincing others, whether it's your team, clients, or even your kids. That's why the world's top organizations invest heavily in teaching persuasion skills. They know that influence used ethically drives results. Too often people believe persuasion is a natural gift that only a few of us have. But in truth, there's a science behind how people make decisions. When you understand that science, you don't waste your time and energy on communication that predictably underperforms. Our guest is Patrick van der Burgt, an expert in ethical persuasion and a business partner of Dr. Robert Cialdini. Patrick's been teaching this ever since 2000. He is a founding member of the Cialdini Institute, and he's here to explain to us the science of human decision making. Let's meet him. Welcome to Richer Soul, Patrick van der Burgt. It's great to have you join us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Rookie.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I grew up with my parents running a retail store in paint and wallpaper, home decorations. And before the Christmas period, they would go to Scandinavia to buy decorations for Christmas, artificial trees and hand glass blown Christmas decorations, that sort of stuff. So I always grew up sort of 2 days, 3 days a week, going to my parents' shop, doing my homework in the back room and that sort of stuff, and always being around in that environment of people coming in and my parents helping them as best they could, and of course, trying to turn a profit. From there, I sort of, little boys like, I'm going to have to take over the shop of my parents. And I have to say, they were always nice enough to say, listen, if you want it, it's there, but you do whatever you want. And I ended up going to retail college to sort of going to the whole business marketing side of things. Then, of course, worked out I didn't want to sell paint and wallpaper. So I was a scuba diver at the time. And so I did like an internship with a scuba diving retail store, which led to me wanting to teach overseas. So I became a dive instructor and I traveled the world. I lived in Thailand for about 9 months, the Caribbean for about 6 months, traveled everywhere. And eventually that led to Australia. So in terms of money, I suppose I grew up that you had to work hard. Certainly the shop was my parents' life, right? They didn't have much time off. They worked there together. So, at least one of them had to be there if somebody else needed to go do something. And just working really hard for their money. Later, as my dad will get into, I realized that there's a whole psychology to actually achieving the goals you're after. And I'm sure my parents intuitively used some of that stuff like we all do, but inevitably didn't know most of it. And so they were working needlessly hard. But so that's sort of been the start of my journey.
Did they actually teach you about running the business, or was it just more kind of you being around the business?
I would help out when I could, do the register, those sorts of things. But in terms of, how to run a business and marketing campaigns and that sort of stuff, that was more in school later.
You mentioned that they work needlessly hard to achieve the results.
Yeah, most people are.
Do you find most people do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's of course painful to point out, but when I bumped into what we're talking about today, and I'm looking forward to sharing things with your audience that they'll be able to use immediately, but it becomes very clear that there's a science to how people make decisions. And so whenever you're trying to achieve a goal where the agreement, the compliance of other people is part of the story, even when you're trying to convince yourself about doing exercises during the week as you should, even there, persuasion and how you formulate things, how you say things has a dramatic impact. And so I see the world, I can't help it. I see the world through the lens of ethical persuasion. I mean, you see the world through the lens of your expertise, and so do I. And so I can't go into a restaurant, look in the menu and not shake my head and go, if they just change the order, they would sell more. Right. And I see that everywhere. I see people, say something that they think will convince other people. And I know the psychology and I know what they're saying is actively, very effectively working against what they're trying to achieve. And I see that all the time. It's the rule for me, basically. I see it everywhere. And I find it absolutely painful because people in business, we invest, I guess, looking back at my parents, we invest so much in terms of our business, right? The time we invest, and often our assets are on the line, right? We might have a mortgage that's affected with how the business does. Then as we grow, we might have employees that rely on us. Their families rely on us. And yet most people in business go out there. They're in the business of convincing other people about their product or service, and they're not using what nearly 100 years worth of science has to say about it. And so they're needlessly wasting time, resources, success, profit, competitive advantage. It's all slipping through their fingers. And you know what? They have no clue it's happening. They're in agony and they just don't know.
It's funny, when I look at a menu, I'm trying to figure out if they have good margins or they're struggling, right? Do they have mispriced food on the menu, and are they going to survive long enough to stay in business if they do sell? Because the restaurant business is extremely tough. So how did you go from, learning in the shop, going to college for it, then traveling the world? Sounds like you had a lot of fun. What was it that got you from that point to being so interested in this?
Jumping ahead a little bit, after the whole scuba diving instructor with long blonde hair, will you believe it or not, settling in Australia. And I was first traveled the country, did some work as a dive instructor. And upon return in Melbourne after the big trip, I landed a job as a sales representative looking after 3 states of Australia, which is a decent area, in the scuba diving wholesale industry. And so I was very happy. I was still involved with my hobby, but now more professionally. And I was visiting retailers across rather large. I mean, you know how big Australia is. So Victoria, my furthest client was like, what's that in miles? 1,000 miles away or something. So decent distances. And I loved what I was doing. I loved the people that I was dealing with because we all shared the same passion. But I thought that for the amount of time and effort that I was putting in and how I was helping retailers, I don't think I was getting the returns that I should have been getting for that amount of effort that was going in terms of what they were buying from me, but also in terms of how much share of their business I got. I mean, there were other sales reps coming in from competing wholesalers. And so we're all trying to sell the most amount of snorkels and masks and scuba tanks and that sort of stuff. So I was frustrated with that. And so my boss at the time, bless him, he got a business coach to come in because he wanted to grow his business. And the business coach identified that people who ran, certainly at the time, who ran dive shops, they do it because they love diving. They're not necessarily great business operators. And so his philosophy was, and I thought it was brilliant, he said, well, instead of you trying to work really hard and let's say do sales training with your sales rep so they can sell 14 snorkels instead of 12 a month, how about we train your sales reps to be sort of business consultants or coaches to help your retailers to grow their business? If we can double their business, then by definition, you would sell them twice as much. Probably more because they feel indebted to you. And so me and the other sales reps, we got sort of trained to deliver sales training and do some simple sort of, business coaching, goal setting and strategies and that sort of stuff. And so this business coach, John McDonald's his name was. I doubt he's still around. I hope so, but probably not. He was a past business partner of Jay Abraham, which of course we all know, big marketing guru. So he was local to Melbourne, and he said, listen, Patrick, if you've got trouble introducing those strategies with your retailers, let us know, or visit us. We're in Vermont, just drop by. And I don't know if you've ever met a Dutch person on holiday. If you say like, if you're ever in Florida, right, come over, stay with us. If you say that to Dutch people, they turn up. Right. Anyway, so he put the invitation out there and I knew how much he charged. So, hey, I turn up. And he actually liked that. He liked it in me that, and I'm sure you've seen that, sometimes you coach other people, you tell them what to do or you show them what to do. This stuff works for other people, works for other industries. But they try it once and it doesn't quite work the way they thought it should. And then they dismiss it and they go, oh, that bullshit doesn't work. And I didn't do that. I would go back to him and say, all right, I'm not doing something right. What do I need to tweak? And he really liked that. And anyway, he started lending me training materials. Back then it was CDs and actually cassette tape series. And he lent me a set, I think it was from the late 90s, from an event in Los Angeles called Mind Capture. And Dr. Cialdini spoke there. And there was 2 cassette tapes in there by Dr. Cialdini. And it blew me away. And so that was really exciting. And then right at that time, I picked up an additional brand. I didn't compete with my other employer. And it was a brand of dry diving suits. If there's any scuba divers listening or people that don't scuba dive, a dry diving suit is basically a shell that you put on. It seals on your wrists and your neck and keeps you dry. And you just wear underneath it whatever is appropriate for the water temperature. Brilliant way to dive. And I use that in the military and in the Netherlands. So I had a lot of experience with these suits. And this dive suit, they're still around. They're called Hot and Dry. It was honestly the best dry diving suit I'd ever used. It was very robust, easy to fix, and it was made in Australia. So there was no wholesaler in the middle, which kept the price very economical for people here. And so I was excited to pick up this new brand. And so with the suits under my arm, I walk into my retailer store. And they go, Hot and Dry, we're not touching that again. What are you talking about? And so now I learned that the year before, they had changed manufacturers of the inner membrane material that's supposed to keep you dry, and all of it delaminated. All these suits started to leak. They all came back. They all had to have their inner membrane suit replaced. It was a nightmare. And so my retailers were laughing at me. It's like, yeah, you're a nice fella, but we're not touching that again. They had a nickname for him. Instead of calling him Hot and Dry, they were called Wet and Steamy or something like that. And so here I was like, I know I've got this great product, but how am I going to get past this? And so armed with Dr. Cialdini's principles, I got to work. I grabbed a notepad and, as Dr. Cialdini, or we teach, right? You have to look for what's in the situation, what's naturally there, because some of this stuff, or all of this stuff, it also works when you use it unethically. But that's short-term win, long-term disaster. You want to use this ethically, which actually research shows produces short-term and long-term success. And so I sat down and I was, trying to analyze what's in the situation here. And anyway, trying to make a long story short, I was able with my retailers to establish trust that this had now been fixed and the problems of the past are in the past. And we've learned from that. We're not making that mistake again. I worked with them to help them get sales, which is what no other sales rep was doing. I had a way, we offered trials in the swimming pool. So their divers could come and try these suits out, have an event, try them out. And we sold them incredibly well. They got to make their normal margins, which were generous. And basically, I helped them earn money. That got the suits in the store. And in 18 months, we were market leader. So, and I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to cheat. I didn't have to manipulate. It was just raising the right pieces of information to the surface when appropriate. And since then, I was completely converted. I was very passionate about also training my retailers about this. So actually back then, I was in communication with Dr. Cialdini, and he said, listen, if you want to pass on what you've learned, that's fine. Just tell people where it came from. So since 2000, I've been teaching people and teams on how to use persuasion science. And I love seeing it and that's the one thing that's unfortunate here that we can't see when I'm talking to a room full of people. I love seeing it in people's eyes when the penny drops, as in, are you serious? It's this simple? And yes, it is. It doesn't actually take that long. I mean, you don't learn it over a podcast episode, but, it doesn't take that big a time investment to learn this stuff. It's more about the habit of constantly being on the lookout for it and bringing it to the surface. But yeah, that's how I started with this and how I just completely fell in love with it.
You made an interesting comment up front. You said most of these people were in the business because they love diving, right? That was their interest. In essence, it was more of a hobby than a business in some senses. Yes, they needed to make money and pay their bills, but it was their love of that subject or that activity that kind of drove them. As you've worked with a lot of business owners, do you find a lot of business owners are kind of look at some of their businesses as hobbies? Not that in the sense that they're not serious about making them highly effective businesses. They're more interested in doing what they love than actually making the money.
I'm not sure if they don't want to see it grow or succeed, but I think if they've got the lifestyle that they think their effort should pay for, then I think they're probably, sort of happy. They don't know that there's this other level, not just, in terms of communication and how you can reach your goals, but also, and we see that a lot, of course, the businesses grow and then they plateau because they don't have the expertise to take that extra step, and it might have nothing to do with communication. But yeah, we see that certainly all the time, and that's where people need assistance from people that can take them past that point. So yeah, I think a lot of people are in a business that they're interested in. I think it might be an interesting observation that people who don't per se have that personal link to it, they might treat it more like, a money-making venture than, a passion business. What I'm meaning to say is that if you started a plumbing business and you knew nothing about plumbing, well, if it got busier, then you wouldn't start working harder helping clients. You would hire more plumbers to do the work while you keep working on the business. And so people who have their own expertise, they often end up working in the business because they certainly feel nobody else can do it as good as they can. So that, I guess, in a way also holds them back.
It does. Before we continue, why don't you take a moment and let everyone know who Robert Cialdini is and the work he's done, so for those who may not.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, so Dr. Robert Cialdini became a university professor at Arizona State University in the late 70s. And he was fascinated by the request process. What makes another person say yes to another's request? How can it be that you can ask for something in one way and you get a small amount of yeses, and you can ask for it in another way, essentially asking the exact same thing. It's the same request, but you ask it in a different way, and now you get a lot more yeses. And at that time, he realized that back then there was already around 50 years worth of scientific research, decision-making and human behavior, but it was all laboratory research, or most of it was laboratory research. And it all started sort of when Hitler started to come to power, because, the world was kind of, quite horrified and shocked. How can, somebody with such intentions mass such a following behind him? So that's when that whole research journey sort of started. But Dr. Cialdini realized that if he's going to have to figure this out properly, he's going to have to go into the real world where, the battles of persuasion are fought every single day. And so he did something that was unheard of for, an academic to do at that time. He took 3 years off, and he, with disguised identity and disguised intent, he enrolled in as many new employee training courses as he could get access to. He would train, change his outfit and his hair and that sort of stuff. And he would enroll, he would apply for jobs and get these companies to teach him what they taught their new employees, because they would, of course, be teaching their new employees the strategies and the dynamics that they had learned from experience produced results in their industry. And so he sold cars from a lot. He sold portrait photography over the phone. He was in restaurants. He spoke to people about cults. What do they use to lock people in their organization? He talked to detectives and police officers about con artists. What do they use for somebody to relinquish their life savings to somebody they don't know? Not that we should do that, but if we can figure out what the psychological triggers are that are underpinning that behavior, then we must be able to use that in an ethical way. And he tried all these different industries as much as he could. He was working with army recruiters, right? You can't get an 18-year-old to clean their room up, right? But how do you get them to sign 4 years of their life away? He spoke to politicians, negotiators, lobbyists, right? All these people depend on their ability to be persuasive to reach their goals. And so all the strategies that they had, he accumulated all these strategies. And what was interesting was that everybody, certainly in different roles, would explain or make sure he knew how different they were. People in sales would say, sales is so different from advertising. And advertising would say, advertising is so different from marketing. And marketing was, we're so different from HR and PR and so on. But instead of looking for what made all their strategies different, Dr. Cialdini looked for what made it similar. What is it about these strategies that makes it work no matter what industry it's in? And that essentially went into that book, Influence, which is that book behind me, that was first published in 1984. Republished in 2015. That's when a seventh principle was added, which was unity after additional research. So the book's 41 years old, yet still to this day, it is constantly being found on the top of timeless reads for business owners. Again, this year, Forbes had a list out. Again, it was on number one. What a lot of people don't know, there's an organization or a company that analyze what top CEOs are recommending people to read. And in 2022, it was Influence. 2023, Influence. 2024, Influence. You're starting to get the message. A lot of business people consider it the best business book of all time, and it should absolutely be in everybody's library. It teaches you, and it's a fun read or listen to if you get an audiobook. It teaches you with a lot of research examples and examples of how this affects people, how the principles work. It doesn't per se teach you how to apply it in business. That's where some formal training really needs to come in. But it certainly also dives into the self-defense part of this story. Because, I mean, I don't know if we have time to go there, but because this can be used unethically, quite a few people are using this unethically. And we don't want to do that because we inevitably get found out, and that causes credibility craters, right? People don't come back to a situation where they didn't do good in the arrangements. But how do you protect yourself against other people using this on you? And so inevitably reading that book will also give you great awareness of how this could be used on you in unethical ways. Anyway, so it's a brilliant book. It sold 7 million copies, 48 different languages. And yeah, goodness, just look up influence or persuasion on the internet, and probably the first 20 websites you're bumping into are all talking or referring to Dr. Cialdini's work. So yeah, sort of considered the godfather of influence and persuasion. I'm delighted to be a business partner of his.
And I've read both of them. I very much enjoyed them and learned a lot from that. I probably have to go back again and spend a little bit more time. So many books. And
I go back I know your audio listeners can't see this, but for those watching the video, this is my book.
My.
Is riddled with little Post-it notes, little inserts. And I mean, I'm regularly grabbing it, going back to it, and I keep revisiting it. It's brilliant.
I have to make more of a habit of revisiting books. I read a lot of new ones, but I don't always go back as much as I should and go back through them. And plus time passes and you start to realize, A, you drift, and B, it hits you different anyway, because if you've grown since the last time you've read it and learned something, now the subtler things really start to come through that you might have missed the first time or not fully understood.
Absolutely. It's like you grow, you're more ready for it. And the other thing people should realize is that because of our reducing attention span, we are now losing more information within a shorter period of time. 90% of what we learn, if there's no follow-up within a week, it's gone. That's why if you go to, let's say, a one-day event or something, right, some conference, and you're sitting there and you got a sore wrist from writing, right, and you've got this whole notebook full of good stuff. And 2 months later, you go, how much of that stuff am I actually using? It's probably one or two things, right? Even though all of it was good stuff, but the rest of it is gone. So same thing with the book. It's great going through it, but you need to realize you're only retaining so much. So, revisiting is a great way to accumulate more.
And to be honest, I think it's been a long time since I read those. So probably a good chance to go back and catch up. And this is one of the issues I think we're faced with today, and that is using this information ethically. Because I think today more than ever, all of these types of things are used in unethical ways. And because the knowledge is so much more freely available, it tends to happen. I will say that I remember not that long ago, if you got an email from a prince in Africa, it was poorly written, even though they had millions of dollars that they were ready to give to you. Today, they're spoofing websites and doing things at a level that is unbelievable.
Yeah, or just, go buy some supplements, and they're always low on stock, right? And the sale's always running out in 2 hours and 16 minutes. And if you come back tomorrow, it's the same 2 hours and a few minutes that sale lasts, right? And it immediately damages your reputation. But if you got sucked in to begin with, then, you're, hopefully you got a good product regardless, but you don't feel happy about your purchase. And we should certainly warn other people that businesses are using this sort of stuff on us unethically. I mean, this is powerful stuff. How dare they use this on us? They should be called out. And that is easier now than it's been before. I mean, we see this on social media all the time, right? If a retailer, let's say a shopping supermarket, makes a mistake or on purpose with their sales tickets, they did this actually, by the way. When something is cheaper, they normally get a bright colored label with the new price on it. Well, they tested if we just put bright colored labels on, leave the price the same, just bright colors label, it doubled sales. And it's just taking advantage of people reacting to something. How dare they?
Russell Brunson did a wonderful job of teaching supplement salespeople how to use this for quick and easy sales. I don't think he looked at the ethical part. Such is life. This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must-listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. So let's talk about this. First off, let's start with the science of human decision making. Can you help us understand that?
Yes, please. So to understand how the principles of persuasion works, it makes a lot of sense to explain how human decision making works. And most people don't know it works this way, so you're in for a treat. All right, so I'm going to lean on the work of a Professor Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. Now, Nobel Prize in Economics, you get that for an extraordinary contribution to that field. Now, what's interesting is that Daniel Kahneman was a professor in psychology and behavioral science. And so, wow, interesting, right? What can a behavioral scientist figure out that has such a big impact on economics? Well, old economics had the opinion that human beings are logical, rational creatures, and we would therefore use logic and reason to formulate our decisions. And Daniel Kahneman proved that that was wrong. And so he explained it in relatively simple terms. So I'll relate that now. So when it comes to decision making, your brain, your audience's brain has two parts, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the intuitive part of the brain. System 2 is the logical and rational part of the brain. System 1 works fast. It takes very little effort to run. It's always running in the background, and it does things for us at a level that we don't have real conscious control over it. And System 1 runs a lot on shortcuts that it's learned, rules of thumb. So, for example, you're looking to buy something that's, well, it doesn't really matter what it is. Let's say it's a TV monitor or something, or a front door for your house. Now, let's go with the door example. You know nothing about door construction, timber types, glass, paint, varnish. And so there you are standing in the hardware store or in a door specialist business, and you have a decision to make. Now, you could do a number of things. You could delay your decision, and you could leave the store, and you could go to the library, and you could start reading books about all those topics for 2-3 months. And then maybe you can go and do some woodworking workshops, right? Learn how to make a door. And then you can go back to that store, and now you would be well educated to come up with a wonderful decision about which door to buy. But do you have the time for that? No, nobody has. So that's often not an option for us. We can't delay our decisions. We can't delay all our decisions. And so maybe something pops up in the back of your head that says, hang on a second, expensive equals good. We've learned from experience that most of the time when you spend more money on something, you get something that's better suited to purpose, lasts us longer, right? Better designed. And so the rule of thumb, expensive equals good, gives us a shortcut to a quicker decision. we might think, you know what, I was thinking of spending this amount. If I just spend a little bit more, chances are I've bought the right door and it was a good investment. And you know what? You're probably right. That's probably exactly what will happen. Chances are that if you spend more money, you get a better quality door. But it doesn't work all the time. These rules of thumb inevitably also don't work sometimes. Sometimes you buy something that's more expensive and it's still rubbish, right? So we say system one, because it uses these shortcuts, it is error prone. Okay, so that's system one. System one can read short sentences. It can detect, a threatening tone in somebody's voice. It can even drive a car on an empty road. Sometimes you come home and you can't actually remember what turnoff you took on the freeway. That's because you were not driving, system one was. Okay, so that's system one. The other side, then we have system two. So system two is a slow process. Takes more time, takes a lot of effort, takes energy to run system two. Daniel Kahneman calls it the lazy controller. It often doesn't even engage. It just engages, when we force it to. And so system two is quite happy to accept the recommendations from system one. Now, system two is used for logical reasoning. And so we can take all the available pieces of information in account and come to a decision. We need system two to process logical arguments in something that's proposed to us or put to us. Now, the big caveat with system two is that it relies on our attention. And we could say that all of us have a limited budget for attention every day. And if you don't have the attention, you will not perform those tasks that system two does very well. All right, so Daniel Kahneman demonstrates back in 2002 that 90% of our decisions are made by system one, automatically, subconsciously. Later research shows that that's now 95%, and that would be increasing. And so this is where a couple of questions hopefully pop up with your audience. First of all, wow, how many decisions can you make on autopilot? And the other question might be, why is this percentage increasing? And that has to do with our attention span. You might be familiar with the story that the goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. Well, our attention span used to be 20 minutes in the 80s. Our attention span now is 7 seconds. We've been beaten by the goldfish. And the internet had a big impact on us. All of a sudden, more information, more decisions that we had to make or had access to. But then the smartphone came, and that was the final nail in the coffin, let's say. So we've all been there. You need to make a phone call. You pick your phone up. You take it off, you unlock it, or you take it off flight mode. And then all of a sudden, there's like 36 apps, notifications popping up, asking you to make a decision if you want to interact with them. And then, goodness, you might open one, right? And then that takes you to a message from this person, that person. There's a news article, takes you to a video, takes you there. 20 minutes later, you put the phone down and you go, what did I pick that thing up for? Right? You've all been there. You didn't even last 7 seconds. 2 seconds, you were gone. And so we have a reduced attention span, and system two relies on our attention span, and we don't have it anymore. And now here comes the clangor. And this is going to explain, especially to people who've been in business for a long period of time in the same industry, we all tend to hear the same thing, that selling or convincing other people seems to be getting harder, right? I didn't have to make this many proposals to get this little amount of yeses. And what I'm going to explain now explains why that is. When we sit down and we contemplate, how am I going to convince the other person? And this doesn't need to be sales related, right? This is about motivating behavior. It could be buying behavior, which therefore is sales, but it could be leadership, right? How are you going to convince your managers to buy into your vision? How do you get them to stay loyal to your mission, even though you might have suggested things that haven't worked in the past? How do you retain that trust? If you're a team manager, how do you get your team to work nicely together and be loyal to each other and the company? If you're in customer service, how do you get people to be happy? If you're in HR, how do you get people to lean into the training and really apply themselves to it? If you're in accounts receivable, how do you get the bills paid on time, right? This is all behavior. And so when we're sitting down contemplating, how am I going to achieve that? You're in conscious thought, which is system 2, right? System 2 is conscious thought. And system 2 has the habit of coming up with pieces of information, reasons, justifications that need system 2 in the other person to process it. And they don't have the time for it anymore. They don't have the bandwidth to process your completely rational, wonderful, good for you, great value proposal because it relies on system 2. They put it in the too hard basket. They push back from your decision and they therefore decide not to decide. And in business, we might explain that experience as, oh, wow, I got no from them. Not really. You got indecision. If you had given them the information that system 1 could have made a decision on, because it's in charge of 95% of the decisions, you would see a greater impact on the amount of yeses that you get. And that can explain some of the seemingly ridiculously high results when you start implementing persuasion science. Now, some people argue with this 90, 10%, 95, 5% point of view or research from the angle that they say, well, maybe if it's everyday decisions, maybe then I would use system 1. But if it's really important, I would use system 2. All right, let's unpack that a little bit. So let's look at buying a house, pretty big decision for any of us. So you probably start looking at an app or a map in terms of where you might want to live. Then you might look at the different suburbs and how they financially are performing or increasing in value. Is the suburb you're looking at, a good choice? Then you might look at the schools in the area. Are they good, right? How are the students performing there? Because the kids have got to go somewhere. Then you might consider the drive to work, how much fuel that's going to take all the time or every day, right? All that sort of stuff. So you get ready to decide where. Then you'll probably go and inspect homes. And so you go and visit armed with a notebook or maybe a tablet with an Excel spreadsheet, right? And you take notes of everything, how big the bedrooms were, how big the garden was, or maybe the balcony, the garage, all that sort of stuff. You write it all down. Now, all of that is system 2 work. But how many times have you met somebody, they've just bought a house and they say something along the lines of, well, it was a bit above the budget, but we just fell in love with the place. We had to buy it. That's not system 2 thinking. They did do all this system 2 work, but when decision-making time came, there were other decision triggers involved, right? And so, anyway, Daniel Kahneman, he says, it's system 1 that runs the show. That's the one that you need to move. And so he's been asked many times through his career, well, how do we do that then? How do we move system 1? And he's basically been pointing at Dr. Cialdini, because Dr. Cialdini is teaching, or what we teach basically, is all about system 1 information, triggers for people to make a decision. So does that explain more about how decisions are made, Rocky?
It does. I have a question. Have you noticed that some people are more natural to system 2 in the way they process versus other people? Because when I look around, I tend to process more. And so when I look at these larger decisions, I tend to think more about them, and I tend to challenge price. As like when you had first started about that, I'm like, I don't assume that a higher price means better quality, but I know a lot of people do. And I'm wondering how much of that is human nature too. Are there certain people you've noticed who are much more apt to go into level 2 decision making, system 2 decision making?
I mean, we're all different in terms of, our character and the speed at which we do things. But we also all like to think that we're unique.
Yes.
and I think generally this works on all of us in terms of it's system 1 that comes up with these suggestions. And system 2 is often easy and quite willing to accept those decisions. So it depends. Surely, if you had more time, if you were less impacted by the amount of decisions that you need to make in a certain time, though then maybe in a few percentages more, you might lean on system 2 more, on your logical, rational brain. But I think we'd be surprised of how often system 1 is affecting us. A good example that I like is some research that was done into the principle of authority, or a dynamic of the principle of authority, I should say. And so they had, at a traffic light, they had a car pull up at the red light, right, as you do. Car stopped behind the car. The light turns green. It should pull away, but the car doesn't pull away. Question is, what do the people behind that car do? And so in half of the situations, it was an older economy car that was standing there at the green light, not driving away. And the other half of the time, it was a luxury car. When it was the economy car, nearly every single person behind them honked the horn, and even 2 of them gave a little kiss to the rear bumper. When it was the luxury car, only 50% of people honked the horn and nobody pushed the rear bumper. Now, when that concept of, hey, if this was to happen to you, what would you do? When that was related to a group of people, as in, okay, what if this happened? A car doesn't pull away at the traffic light, even though the light is green. Who would you honk at more readily, an economy car or the luxury car? The perception of what people thought they would do was dramatically different. Especially males said, oh, I would honk the horn very quickly against the luxury car, where the results were already in. That's not actually what people do. So we might sometimes think that these things don't work on us, and they actually still are. So yeah, I place my faith in there still. But yeah, sure, of course, we're all different, and we process information differently. But I think for the bulk of our decisions, these rules apply.
No, I wouldn't doubt that for the bulk they do. And just like you mentioned, I think for a lot of people, they don't necessarily realize, I don't know if the right word is illogical, but how they behave in those situations. So like you said, they will say, I won't do this. And yet the studies show hands down they do. And even more importantly, and I'll admit it with myself, we're not even paying attention to what we do and say half the time.
Yeah, we're always looking for shortcuts.
Yes.
I mean, I've started my own podcast channel, and an example I explain in there is that actually I tell a story about how I bought speakers when I was with my father, and how, what the experience was like, and which pieces of information were there that were persuasive. And I then pull that forward into the fact that I've recently just bought some speakers for my office, and haven't bought speakers in a long time. But now, I'm looking for the brand that I'm familiar with, but now I go online and I see that quite a lot of people have given a very average review of that brand's speakers. Now, I could go to retail stores and I could go and talk to salespeople. I could do more research, but I can't be asked. The fact that there's already so many people saying, like, listen, might have been a great brand in the past, but for this type of speaker, I was unhappy with the performance of these things. That's good enough for me. And I move on to another brand. So we look for that information, and we could investigate more, but we don't. So, we move on more quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to pay more attention. to some of the things that I do.
Shall we dive a little into the different principles? Because time's ticking away. I know I can talk about this for hours, literally.
Yes, please.
All right, cool. All right, so there's 7 principles of persuasion, and we say they're universal principles, meaning they work in all cultures, all languages, and all countries, which is more and more important now because our cultures are intermixed and it's much easier now to do business with people in other countries. So this is something that works everywhere. All right, so there's 7 principles. Let me run through them and give you a quick explanation of each. So all these words you've heard them before, you might even know how they work, but it's unlikely that you or most of your audience would understand what the activators are of each principle and what the amplifiers are of each principle. So reciprocity is one of those. Reciprocity teaches that we respond to the rule that we should give back the same type of behavior that was first given to us. And so in business, we've taken that as in, okay, we got to give people stuff because they somehow then feel indebted to us, and then we have more chance of them wanting to work with us. And whilst that's in essence true, a lot of businesses get this wrong. A lot of businesses are investing in what they think will activate reciprocity, but it actually doesn't. And so they waste a lot of money, maybe on something that's still nice, but it doesn't activate reciprocity. A good example is the downloadable ebook that you might find on some people's websites that they use as a lead generator. And so they say, oh, we have a wonderful ebook. Just put your name and your email address in. We'll send you the download link, our gift to you. Nice try, but that's not a gift. A gift is something that's given without a requirement needing to be met. It was name and email address first, then I will give you the download link. So it was a reward. It wasn't a gift. Same thing with, for example, having a waiting room where people have to wait for your services. Could be a car dealership, could be a dentist, right? If you have a little fridge there with water in it, take a drink on us, or a coffee machine, that sort of stuff. Help yourself, our gift to you. Nice try. Will not activate reciprocity. So it's not as easy as it looks, but that's what reciprocity is. Reciprocity also comes back in negotiations. There's this concept of reciprocal concessions, where we should first come in with our larger request and then retreat to a smaller one, which increases the amount of yeses you get. You can turn a no into a yes. Liking, we all like to work with people that we like. It's not rocket science. But certainly in sales, we tend to be taught that if you're trying to convince me about your product or your services, well, then you should do what you can so that I like you. And that's not wrong, and it's not incorrect, but it's not the most powerful. If you're trying to sell me your services, it's nice if I like you, but it'd be more powerful if I got the feeling that you genuinely liked me. Because if you like me, you're going to look after me, and I'm safe with you. So we have to genuinely come to appreciate our audience. That's a fascinating topic. Unity, that's a latest principle that was added. So unity, where liking similarities is part of liking, right? We like people that are like us. But unity is about a sense of community, a group that we both feel part of. And if that's in the situation and you let that come to the surface, you get a familiarity with people. You've had that. You're sitting in the train or on a holiday somewhere, and you talk to someone who's from the same town as you. Shouldn't have any bearing, really, but all of a sudden, big smile, right? You're like a half best friends. You can have that with board members that you're presenting to, but not if you don't do any homework. Part of unity is also co-creation. So working on things, developing things together creates a lot of unity and loyalty to each other. Very powerful. Social proof. We've heard of that term actually coined by Dr. Cialdini. It used to be consensus before that. Social proof is that we follow the actions of others, especially when they are numerous, when the others are similar to us, and when we are uncertain. So there's a few amplifiers hidden in that definition. but basically means we follow the crowd. And so a lot of businesses have jumped on collecting online reviews and testimonials, and that's great. It's wonderful. And if you think that that is important for your business, you'll be delighted or shocked to hear that social proof has a lot of other dynamics which are equally powerful as testimonials and reviews that you might not be using. So the key with, not the key, but one of the dynamics with social proof is that when it comes to testimonials, you want to try and ask people to leave a detailed review, which makes them more valuable. And when presenting them to people, you would ideally present them with social proof of people that are like them. When you're presenting to somebody who's a mature female business owner, when you turn up with your 5 favorite testimonials that are across the board, a young guy, young girl, middle-aged guy, middle-aged woman, and an older couple that run businesses and they use your services and are happy, well, that's good. It's social proof. But what if you turned up with 5 testimonials, genuine ones, of other mature women that use your services and are happy, and you're presenting to this female business owner? You can feel it, right? It's like, they're all like me, right? It's much more powerful. Authority is the principle that has to do with our credentials. How are we perceived with our expertise? And so the fact is that we cannot raise our own credentials when you're face to face with someone. Right? You can't say, hi, my name's Patrick. Let me tell you the 35 reasons why you should listen to me, right? Even if it was only your subconscious is going to go, you are full of yourself, right? And we raise that because I want you to process the recommendations that I'm going to give you in this talk, right? I want you to process that from the angle, the respect or the gravity that my experience sort of brings, right? And we are all experts in our own field. But what actually happens is you lose on authority and you lose on liking. It's lose-lose. You can't do that. And so one way you can do it, which is socially acceptable, is to be introduced by someone, right? That's why, I tend to get introduced in podcast episodes. When you speak on stage, there's an MC that comes on. And so you need to start organizing for you to be introduced by others before you meet someone in person. Authority is also about credibility. And I'll share a real quick thing your audience can use immediately. We use numbers in our communication, right? We work with 1,200 clients already. We saved this client $45,000 last month, right? We have a tendency to round numbers off. And we are shooting ourselves in the backside. Because if you round numbers off, you took a liberty. And as the audience, I don't know how much liberty you took. When you say 75% of customers did this, right? Surely it wasn't exactly 75%. Maybe it was 69, right? You took a liberty and I don't know how much liberty you took. If you stop rounding off your numbers, credibility in your communication immediately goes up. 75.4%. And now we're back there again, or 69.8, whatever it is. Even if it's a lower number, the credibility will boost you up. That's also part of authority. Consistency then is that people have a motivation within them to stay true to past actions and behaviors. And so we should find out if people have made public or active statements in the past that our proposal aligns with, that makes it harder to say no to it, but we can also create opportunities for a person to verbalize what's important to them. And then we make sure that our proposal aligns with those values later on, right? And I would say that it's very ethical, but it also makes it much harder to say no to it. We sort of persuade ourselves with consistency. And then lastly, scarcity. People have a fear of loss. We value things more that are less available. And so I'd urge your audience again to look at your brochures, your website, your sales pitches. When you are talking about your product or service and how that's going to help someone else, most people have a tendency to explain all of that in terms of what benefits we stand to gain if we use your product or service. If you get this car, you'll be there faster, you'll save money, you'll be in more comfort, all these sorts of things. That's gain language, where if you use loss aversion, if you mentioned what they would not be getting if they don't move in your direction, research will support that is far more persuasive, and you'll get more yeses that way. Yet what are most people in business doing? They're all talking about what we stand to gain instead of what we stand to lose. Right, that was probably the fastest way of me going through the 7 principles.
At the end of the day, I think what people have to realize is there is a lot to this. There is definitely a science and an art to it. And as you showed when you put your book up and the number of, little tabs in there, it's not easy. Just as you were going through, I'm like, oh, you know what? I forget to do that. Oh, you know what? That's right. I remember that. And I've read all these books, so I'm familiar with it. But then actually remembering to do it and having a better process of it is what would be helpful.
It's a habit you got to get into. As in the habit of looking for it and using it consistently and then in the most efficient way. And if we don't do that, it's basically costing us every single day. But it is fun to learn. It's not difficult. I'm sure anybody could grasp it. And that's why I'm very passionate about young adults learning this before they try and enter the workforce. I mean, it's sort of confronting to figure this stuff out and go, this is awesome. I wish I knew it 20 years ago, right? Yeah, but better late than never, right?
So that right there is a problem we consistently struggle with, which is the people who need to learn the most are the least willing to learn it.
Maybe they're not being persuaded.
Maybe they're not being persuaded of the loss, or maybe they're just who they are. And definitely need to go spend some more time thinking through this and trying to figure it out. And I do know that there is a tremendous amount of persuasion being used against us. And once you start to understand it, it becomes very easy for you to just notice things and go, oh, that's what he's doing right there. And it loses all its power because of it.
Yeah, although if it's used ethically, you don't mind. When you go into a store and you are thinking you probably will want to buy this thing, you'd be pissed off with the salesperson if they didn't tell you it was the last one, genuinely, right?
Correct.
But yeah, you're right. Once we are able to identify it, then we can realize, hey, hang on a second, I've got, not all the time, by the way, but we're now able to go, hey, hang on, is my reaction to this justified? Or you can try and pull a few threads to see if it unravels and go, hang on a second, this is not true and genuine, and therefore protect yourself.
Yeah. And that might be the last one. So then the question is, well, when does the next round come in? Oh, next week? Oh, okay. Thank you. I don't have to wait that long, right? It's not so bad. Definitely a lot to think about. And you've reminded me of books. And I was going back to think and I'm realizing I haven't read some of these books in 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And I've got to go back and see how I've changed and where I have forgotten to implement parts of what I learned. So I very much thank you. Thank you for that. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
Yeah, well, can't help it. That relates back to my field. People need to realize that there's a science to how people make decisions. And without that science, you've got time, resources, successes, competitive advantages slipping through your fingers and you don't even know it's happening. So yeah, what do people need to realize about success is that you are dependent on your persuasive efforts to be successful, even with yourself in some cases. And yeah, it doesn't matter what you say per se. I don't teach people what to say. It's the type of information, the bits of information that you bring to the surface in your own words that can have a dramatic impact. And wish people would investigate this topic and get excited about it.
What's one lesson you learned later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That's a personal one related to, our kids. You can work really hard in business, but in the end, it's just about family and where you spend your time. So certainly as fathers, we tend to have a feeling of to always need to be out there and work really hard for the family. But if that means that you're away from the family, that is something that could actually work against you later. Your children value the time they've had with you, not the time that you were away from them. So treasure the time you have with them.
And that is true. Kids value your time much more than they value anything else. And so that's an important thing. Speaking of kids, if you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Okay. I'm going to make that in my field of expertise again. When you go for that job that you're trying to get, of course, it's important that you're persuasive. But research shows if people go into an interview and they're wearing clothing that is branded, as in that we know costs a little more, they get hired more quickly, and they get offered higher starting wages. So it just highlights, it's part of the principle of authority that, we need to dress to impress. But yeah, showing off that, you're doing reasonably well, that does have its positive effects. So make sure that you dress very nice when you go to your job interview.
Is that a reflection of the brand, or is it a reflection of dressing nicely? Today, I guess it really depends on the type of job, because a lot of times brands aren't necessarily easily seen in job interviews, right? Depending on the clothing.
It has to do with uncertainty. When you meet someone for the first time, they don't know you. And so they have a lot of uncertainty. And so we look for outward clues to
their markers.
Quickly form an opinion about you.
Okay.
And so, how your hair looks, how your teeth look, how you're dressed. And we shouldn't go and hire an Armani suit to turn up to our job interview and then bring it back again, right? Whatever we have genuinely in our wardrobe that we're comfortable wearing and represents where we are in life, from that we should, dress to impress.
That sounds good. You've got your own book. I'm sure you've got a website. If people would like to learn more about you and your work, how can they do that?
Yes, thank you for asking. So ethicalpersuasion.com.au for Australia, which is easy to remember. The book, which I wrote with some of my colleagues, is called How to Hear Yes More Often. You can find that on all your online retailers. Nice combination to purchase with the book Influence if you don't have it. I have a little giveaway for people as well. If you go to our website and you follow the menu to the free section, there is some complimentary learning materials there, including a downloadable ebook. No email required. You can just right-click and download. It's yours. And there's also a 7-day email challenge. For that, of course, we do need your email address, and you get another nugget of gold that you'll be able to use over the next 7 days. And yeah, I hope this sparks the interest. I hope you use some of the things that we've discussed today or some of the things you learn in the free ebook. And I'd love to hear some of the outcomes of you implementing this. So find me on social media like LinkedIn and leave some comments about your experiences. And yeah, please do realize that, reading a book, podcast, free ebook is nice, but it doesn't help you to develop application skills and confidence and that habit of applying it. And that's really where some formal training comes in. And if I can help you with that, I would be absolutely delighted.
And thank you so much for joining us. We'll put those links in the show notes. If today's conversation helped you see persuasion in a new light, take one small step Try one of the principles that Patrick shared and notice how it changes the next conversation. Remember, persuasion isn't about pressure, it's about connection and also understanding the science of how people decide. You don't have to push, you simply guide. If this episode resonated, share it with someone else who you think could use a little bit more yes in their life. And as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Have an abundant week.